Hey, welcome to Faith and Culture Now. Today, my guest is Marika. Marika, thank you so much for being here. So, we are at the Radha Krishna Temple in Allen, Texas, where you are a yoga instructor here at the temple. And you are here regularly, just teaching and being here, serving and helping. And so today we're going to be talking about Hinduism a little bit. And I wanted to begin by just asking you to sort of briefly define, if you could, what Hinduism is.
Okay, Hinduism is very broad term as far as a faith goes, but basically Hinduism, people that believe in Hinduism there's several tenets that they believe in, and that one is that God is one, there's only one God. However, God manifests in many forms over a very vast time. So that's one. And the belief in reincarnation is another, that we don't perfect ourselves in one singular lifetime, that it takes many lifetimes. And so there's this progress that we make, or maybe it's not progress, maybe we step back and move forward, step back, move forward, like that. But everybody's path is individual, so it's also a very individualistic religion or faith as it goes. And as far as other tenets of it it's known for its peacefulness, because it believes strongly in nonviolence. Mm-hmm. And there are many other tenets that are related to that, as far as the principle of karma, that the consequences of my actions, there will be consequences, maybe not, and that also ties in with the reincarnation, that basically if I do something in this lifetime, perhaps the consequences of it will not manifest necessarily in this context of this life, but in future lifetimes.
Yeah, very good. So here at the temple, many people come to worship, and they primarily come individually to worship on their own. So you mentioned it's more of an individual religion.
Yes.
When people come here, what are some of the things that they do at the temple?
So at the temple, worship is considered in Hinduism to be personal, and it's a personal path. So some people may be interested in rituals and participating in the rituals, and they may be more looking to come for those activities at the temple, which we have several types of rituals that go on a regular basis, weekly or in between, and so on. And that's celebrations. When we celebrate, there's rituals as well. And then other people may come for devotional singing. Other people may come for a peaceful place to meditate or to just pray. They may come for all combination, or many sorts of combination of all these things.
Yeah. One of the things that you mentioned a minute ago was with different cycles of lifetime. One of the questions that people often ask about faiths is, what do the people believe happens at death? And obviously with Hinduism, death is not the end. But is there sort of a final state in Hinduism when you're done going through this path? Or is it just simply a sort of never-ending path?
Well, being that we are the soul, and I think all religions will accept that we're not the body is a vessel. So we can start with that premise, that in Hinduism, that's a big premise, that we are not the body. Mm-hmm. So that is step number one in understanding that. So as the soul, that's our true identity. And our true identity, our true relative, eternal relative, is God. In Hinduism, we'll have certain mother, father, but then the next life we have someone else, and the next life someone else is in our life, and so on. We don't have memory of the previous lives in general. Or if we do at birth, or at young age, it fades out. So it's like the train ride that you take a long journey, and in that train ride someone is in the compartment with you for a little while, and then they get off at a certain city and you may continue your journey. or maybe you get off. But it goes on like that. They're there for a little while. But there's one person, divine person, who's there with you all the time, forever and ever, eternal, and that is God. So that, in Hinduism, the God resides in you, in your heart, and knows all your thoughts, actions, and so on, everything you've ever done and everything you've ever thought, and so on. And that is the starting point there. From there, then, you move to the thought that what happens at death, let's move to before death a little bit, that at death, in Hinduism, the scriptures say that whatever your thoughts are at the time of your death, that's where you will go in your next life. So this is why they say that bringing your mind to God is not something that will automatically happen at the time of death, so that you have to do practice or spiritual practice, what they call sadhana, spiritual practice and practicing God's presence throughout your life, so that when you do get to the point of death, that you will think of God. Otherwise, you won't be going to that point. You may come back as a human and you may not come back as a human. It depends on basically what progress spiritually you made in that life. So we think of investments in the material world, your stocks, your bank account, and so on. So spiritually, we also have an investment account that we build, and God knows. So if we do not spend time thinking of our spirituality and making that practice to build our relationship with God, then our spiritual bank account is down, maybe zero or maybe very low. Building that is all that matters at the time of death. That's the only accounting that will be done. They won't be looking at your title, your career, your how much wealth you've amassed, and so on. And the gates of heaven or whatever will open only for those people who have certain millions, and so on. So it's more the spiritual, the inner wealth. And so therefore, at the time of death, that will make a difference. If you've done something heinous, like murdering or something, you may not get a human form. You may reincarnate as animal, lower life forms that have lower consciousness. So there's different levels of consciousness. The human form in Hinduism is considered the greatest form. Out of 8.4 million sentient species of beings, types of beings, the human is considered the most highest because of the intellect. And we have that discernment that doesn't exist in the free will that other species like animals don't have. So because of our free will, we're able to choose to love God. God can't force us to. There's no love when you're forced, right? So our progress is based on how our relationship with God goes. So therefore, the ultimate goal in Hinduism is called yog, Y-O-G. In fact, that's what yoga that you hear that everybody does in a studio is. That's the word they use. In the Western world, they added the A at the end. But the word yog comes from Sanskrit, and that's the goal. And yog means union. So the idea is union with God. And how do we achieve that? So it doesn't happen. And so death comes, we make progress. If we get to be human again, then we come back another life. Until we keep moving and we're getting closer to God, perfecting ourselves. We need to perfect our heart. A pure heart will make us more closer till we're merging or really connected with God, the deepest relationship. And at that point, there's some choices where the terminology uses God realized. But we realize who God is. That means we're not looking with our material eyes, but we're looking with our divine eyes, and we can see God to a full extent. We understand His nature, and that requires a very pure heart. So there's this progression going, and at that point, there's choices. There's what they call moksha, which is liberation.
Mm-hmm.
So that means the soul is liberated from this cycle of birth and death, birth and death, birth and death. And there are choices there as well. There are different stations where we can go. There's sort of like the heaven, which is nice, no material worries and so on, but there's higher states. So the higher states are places where God's divine pastimes are being happening continually in certain forms. So if we worship, then we may be drawn to those pastimes and we'll go there. But ultimate, if we want to even go further up, is where we don't desire liberation. And you
Mm-hmm.
may ask, well, how could that be that you don't want that?
Mm-hmm.
What we're striving for here is love. So the most highest form is selfless love.
Mm-hmm.
And that's called in Hinduism divine love, or prem, P like Peter, R-E-M like Mary, prem. And that word, it's a Sanskrit word, and if you were to try to define it in English, if you open the Webster or whatever, imaginary Hindu Webster dictionary, you would have thousands of words and still not be able to define it, because it is so deep of a concept. So the goal is to reach that state, and that state means I don't want moksha. I want to please God selflessly, totally selflessly.
Mm-hmm.
No ego involved here. I'm not doing it for my ulterior motive that, okay, if I do this for God, God will give me X. No. I just want to please God. That I'm surrendered and I want to please God. And then we reach this state then we don't desire liberation. We just say, put me, in fact, there's scriptures that talk about certain people who were saying, Lord, I don't want liberation. You can send me to hell if that is your wish, if that pleases you. Wherever
Mm-hmm.
you wish, if you're pleased, then I will be happy as can be. That is my happiness, is your happiness. So that is the ultimate state that we wish to strive for.
Yeah, and you mentioned having scriptures. I know that there are many, many scriptures in Hinduism, but what are some of the main books or texts that you guys see as holy or sacred?
Yes, there's so many texts in Hinduism that you can spend lifetimes just reading them first time, but there are some that are more prevalent or dominant, that are known and that people turn to more often. And one that many people know, they've heard the name before, is Bhagavad Gita,
Mm-hmm.
for example. And Bhagavad Gita is one, but there are many others. And there's the Upanishads, there's the Bhagavatam, Srimad Bhagavat Mahapuran is the full name of that, which is just all the divine pastimes of Sri Krishna. But there are many, many. So the Bhagavad Gita, that stands for, Bhagavad means God, and Gita means song. So it's called Song of God, and it's actually something that Krishna, in his dissension and had avatar, he had spoken to someone, and he just basically said all these very, very profound things. It's 700 verses.
Mm-hmm.
And it contains just about everything in there that you would probably need to address life. If you only read that one and nothing else, you could probably, and if you took it seriously, you could reach the moksha, the liberation, and beyond.
Mm-hmm.
So that's
very
one of
good.
them.
So with Hinduism, I want to make a quick distinction here. You were talking about the yoga and the exercises and stuff. So in America, we do sort of two kinds of yoga, right? There's yoga that people go to the gym and they do yoga to sort of get in shape. And then there's spiritual yoga, which is a Hindu practice where you do poses, but the primary focus of the poses isn't to stretch muscles, it's to think about spirituality. And so do you want to talk maybe just for a second about that?
Sure. Yoga, again, going back to that word, what does it mean? It means union with God. So the whole purpose behind it is, if you just look at it as physical exercise, that's just getting, the very superficial, maybe 5-10% of what yoga is about. Because we do want physical exercise because we've been given this special human form, and it's this special grace that God has given, as I explained earlier, and we want to take care of it. We want to have a good vessel. If you can imagine, you can have a pot. Think of our body as a pot, and it could collect God's grace, or it could be a pot turned over, and it's like the rain coming down. The grace just goes everywhere and no grace goes in. That's when we turn our back to God.
Mm-hmm.
Or the pot could be up, but if it's defective, it has many holes, so whatever comes in just goes right back out. So there's that. So what we want is taking care of our body, but then we need to, if we don't bring our mind there and our heart and our soul, then the transformation that yoga can bring you and do for you are not possible. So no matter what, and basically for Hindus, we don't see yoga as just exclusively for people who are of the Hindu faith. I teach yoga and people come from many faiths, but you can do this, all these concepts can work for you no matter what faith you are. So you basically want to reach God, a form of God you worship. You're what we call Ishtadevata, which means your worshipable form of God. You want to reach that. So your goal is to bring that into your practice. You may be doing physical poses, but you're bringing this convergence of body, mind, and soul into that practice.
Mm-hmm. It's it's meant to be very holistic.
It's very
for
holistic,
the person.
Very holistic, and therefore the power of that is so much more in transforming your mind and bringing this sense of peace and bringing health. Because if you look to the higher, sort of a hierarchy of your health includes your spiritual health. If you address your spiritual health, they say in Hinduism that illness, there's a whole body of Hinduism scriptures called Ayurveda. There are these bodies that talk about this physical health as well. But the idea is that the illnesses that we have are actually manifestations of our inner illness that we have, our impure thoughts, impure heart, so on. The defects of our soul and our heart are manifest in our physical form.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we address them in a deeper level, then these things can be addressed. That's one concept. The other concept is that the body has an inner wisdom to heal itself. It's just we're not in touch with it. And in Hinduism, there's many bodies. There's the physical body, and there's subtler forms until we get to the soul. Think of the Russian perestroika or whatever, the dolls, that one
Mm-hmm.
goes inside the other, inside the other, inside the other. So basically they're layers of your being. And you have more subtle, you go from the gross, the very material, to the subtle, the very subtlest, which is the soul, which is so tiny, and but it is considered a fragment of God.
Very good. Yeah, I think that's a very good explanation. I would also like to ask you for a minute about what are some reasons why someone would want to embrace Hinduism?
That's a very personal, with everyone, their journey in spirituality is very personal. So the important thing, no matter what religion that you decide, whatever faith you have, and that's one thing about Hinduism that I see, is that it doesn't focus on that you have to worship this one form, that there are many, God manifests in many ways, And so therefore he has many forms that he's manifested, and he can manifest in multiple forms at the same time, I mean, because of that all-powerful nature of his. So there's not a focus on the form, and whatever is attractive to you. So the goal of all religions, and this is of course goal of Hinduism, but the goal of all religions, when you think about it, is union with God, loving God, building the relationship with him. I don't think undeniably that there's any that doesn't have that as a goal. So all scripture boils down to that. How do we build our relationship? So that is the goal. And so what attracts people is probably many things. Some people are attracted to, as I say, one aspect versus another, but probably maybe the individualisticness of the path and the nonviolent aspect of it are two aspects that people are attracted to.
Are there any things you would say tend to be stumbling blocks for people to embrace Hinduism?
I think because it's based on a Sanskrit text, and that there's so many texts that it could be overwhelming to people. As I said, you can be in a room, a huge room, and that still wouldn't fill all the volumes of scripture, and it's in Sanskrit language, which is a different alphabet, and as Westerners, many people would not be able to learn that easily. I mean, that's not given. It's not like French, German, or it's totally unique. Goes way back. Sanskrit is considered the mother of all languages. But it can be overcome, but that's a big obstacle to some people. But many texts have the transliteration and the translation. There's been many helps that have been made, and especially now with internet, there's many ways that people can read and see other language versions of the scriptures and slowly get to learn and dive into it. Many have been introduced to it through, they've gone through yoga teacher instruction or something like that, and they've gotten some exposure to it, but it's they get very little there compared to if you dived in on your own or something.
Yeah. Very good. Well, one sort of final question is, how does Hinduism typically view other faiths and other religions? You've talked about multiple ways to find God. You've talked about God manifesting himself in multiple ways. So do you typically see other religions as just additional or different manifestations of God?
So Hinduism doesn't, in Hinduism we don't push any form of God on anyone in essence. So we look at God, everyone as having the free will to choose whatever form. Again, the goal is not that you worship one particular form, it's that you build that relation. Whoever you call, there's still one God, but whoever you call God is becoming close to you. That's the important thing.
Yeah.
So we like, the idea of whatever form that you worship is fine. And I think in Hinduism, also happily embrace and take things from other faiths that and incorporate or bring up. I know in this particular temple, a lot of the lectures you'll hear some quotes from many different religions and discussion of that. So it's very tolerant in that sense and open.
Sometimes you hear people say things like, well, Hinduism has millions of gods.
Yes.
You're saying they have one God.
Yes.
So is it a misnomer that there are millions of gods? Is it a misunderstanding of your concept of God?
So again, this boils down to the whole idea that their God is one. However, God can manifest in many ways at many times. God can be formless and he can have a form, and he can be in between, and he can be in many, expand himself and be with many people. He's with each one of us. He's the soul of our soul. So he's already with each one of us. We can't see him with our material eyes, but he's there with you as much as he's with me. So God can manifest in many ways. So therefore, there are many parts, even if you just take India, there are many different forms of God that people worship. And so, and then there are the devatas, which are considered like the soldiers or the lower, they're not quite at the God form, but they're like God's soldiers, like maybe you'd say archangels or angels. And so there are those kind of beings, but they're not at that divine level. So that is the real concept. Hinduism is one God, but most people, because they see these, either the statues or so on, and then they think that they're worshiping many. But there are many manifestations of the same God. So God, at different times and different places, he manifests only certain aspects, certain of his divine aspects and attributes. That's the idea. Some have more of the divine aspects, and some have very less. But depending, he intervenes in the human life in different ways. So we could maybe recognize that if we saw, but they say most people may not recognize immediately. I mean, God could come in the form of a pauper, humble, very form, just like Jesus was very humble. Krishna also, he was born in a very humble environment, and some people may not recognize that at the time who are around them. And so that's how that works.
Yeah, very good. Well, this has been very interesting. I think that it's certainly been very educational. And so I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today and taking the time to do this video. Thank you so much. And so, Marika, it's been good to have you here.
I thank you for having me, and I want to end by saying the words namaste, which we put our hands to our heart and say, and that means I bow down to the God and goodness within you, no matter what religion you are. Radhe Radhe. Bye-bye.
Right. Thank you. See you next time.